Hello everybody and welcome to this session on Superfoods of Scandinavia. It's lovely to see you all. My name's Sue Baic and I'm a registered dietitian and nutritionist based out of the UK. I've worked in the NHS for about 30 years and I've also worked in University of Bristol as a researcher and teacher for 10 years. So that's just a bit about my background. I now work part-time on lovely ships as a guest speaker and been to Scandinavian countries many times now, and that's me there on the right on just getting off a ship in Norway. And I'm absolutely passionate about the food of Scandinavia, and my aim today is really to inspire you with some of the research on the foods of Scandinavia that you can maybe put into practice no matter where you live in the world. My colleague Heather will take questions, so if you want to type them into the chat box as we go along, when you think of them, please do, but we'll address them at the end. And I will also be linking you as we go through to some sources of further information. So hopefully there'll be things that particularly stimulate your interest and you think you'd like to know a bit more about that. And I will give you a link, really useful, free to download information on all of those areas. So I picked this topic really because Nordic diets are so much in the news. You've probably heard a lot about the diet Mediterranean, but it's Nordic diet that's in the news at the moment. And I've just picked out a few of these headlines really. We've got forget the Mediterranean diet, the Nordic foods could be key to avoiding heart disease, say scientists. We've got headline there from one of the papers, eat like a Viking to be healthy, which I quite liked. And then there's a couple of books. They're not just about diet, but they cover diet as well. So the Almost Nearly Perfect People, that's great, isn't it? And then the Nordic Guide to Living 10 Years Longer. That would be great, wouldn't it, if we could do that in good health, a happier, healthier life. So that's some of the background really about the Nordic diet, how it's been in the news. It's very similar to the Mediterranean diet, but I think probably it's easier to adopt for some of the more northern countries. So wherever you are, if you're in the States or Canada or Europe, it's probably a bit easier in some ways if you live in northern countries. But there's so much of it that we can put into practice no matter where we live. It really is the traditional eating style of those Scandinavian countries. So I've listed them there, and I expect many of you have been on ships to these wonderful places. So we've got Iceland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and they're fantastic places to visit. The Nordic diet is really a pattern of particular foods. So it's lots of fish, not surprisingly. It's some red meat and game, but interestingly, it's only about half the amount that we eat in the UK or the USA. So they don't eat as much meat as a lot of other countries. Whole grains make up a huge amount of the diet. So things that's like rice, rye, oats and barley makes about 25% of the calories in the diet, which I don't know if that surprises you, but whole grains feature really predominantly. And we're going to look at all of these as we go through. Fruit and vegetables, it's at least 5 a day. Again, I don't know if that's a surprise to you, but you can see there from the triangle on the right hand side that fruit and vegetables of lots of different colours and types feature really mainly in that Nordic diet. The type of oil is rapeseed oil predominantly, and we'll look at that in more detail. Nuts, they play a big part because they're so easy to grow in the summer months, and then they can be stored over the winter as a source of nutrition during the colder winter months. And then obviously things like low fat, cheese and dairy play a role as well. The thing about the Nordic diet is it's nutrient dense. So it's got unsaturated fat, which is a good type of fat. It's got fibre. It's got vitamins and minerals, and then it's got something called polyphenols, which I know you will have all come across and heard about. Often these are just the colours in plant foods. but they play all sorts of roles in the body in terms of protecting against various different diseases. So polyphenols is a good thing to have in the diet, and the Nordic diet is really rich in those. So that's looking at an overview of it. What's the research on the Nordic diet? Well, if you're like me, you always want to know how good is the evidence behind something before you put it into practice. So I'm just going to touch very briefly on the scientific principles that have been used to look at the Nordic diet, because I hope that might interest you. The first type of evidence is observational studies, differences in populations. So looking at how closely people follow the Nordic diet and what sort of disease they have. So they're correlation studies. They can't provide causation, but they give us a really good idea of what sorts of dietary factors are important. And there's been a lot of those done on the Nordic diet. The second sort, a bit of a busy slide this, but this is a experimental trial. And this is what's usually done as the next step after observational studies. So you have a group of participants and you allocate them to either have a particular diet factor in high level or in a low level, the control diet. And then you compare what happens to them in things like, maybe it would be blood pressure, maybe it would be brain scans if you were looking for cognitive changes in dementia, or maybe even in terms of cancer cells. So it's an experimental study where you're looking at the effect that has and you're looking at the outcome. And that might be done for things such as berries or fish, so that we know what effect they have. And then the third part of this is laboratory studies, where you're looking at the effect of certain nutrients on cells in a test tube. And all of these bits of information, when they're put together, are really important. They're like pieces of a puzzle that you put together, which really gives us a clear idea of how the Nordic diet can influence health. I'm not expecting you to be able to read that, but this is just some of the papers that I used when I was putting this talk together, just so that you get an idea of the sorts of research that's been out there. There's a lot of it, and published in really reputable scientific journals. So again, these have all got the word Nordic in the title, haven't they? The good news for us is that that information has all been synthesized together into a lovely report that came out from the World Health Organization year before last. It was just before the coronavirus pandemic. And they put Nordic diets right up there with Mediterranean diets in terms of reducing what they call non-communicable diseases, which is things like heart disease, cancer, dementia, those sorts of conditions. So that work has all been synthesized, and really interesting principles have come out of that. So I hope I've shown you that there's a good scientific background to this, and that I just haven't sort of drawn these foods out of a hat, really. So what does it say about terms of benefits? Well, let's start with physical health. Heart disease, cholesterol, high blood pressure. I don't know if anybody in the audience has got any of those, but it's probably one of the most common things around the world. So really good benefits in terms of heart disease, reducing heart disease, stroke, lowering cholesterol levels, lowering blood pressure. Weight management, that was interesting. And then type 2 diabetes prevention. But also really topical nowadays, things like immunity, inflammation. And inflammation, we know, is linked to a lot of the diseases that happen as we age. Positive aging, increased life expectancy are linked with that Nordic diet. And then finally, gut health and some cancers like the colon, again, lower levels in the Nordic type diet. But not just physical health, it's also mental health, which I find fascinating. And the areas where it's important there are in things like cognitive decline, so changes as we age, sometimes in memory, learning, problem solving. There's been a lot of studies on that. Dementia, which I've mentioned a few times, and then amazingly, mood as well. And I just want to show you one little piece of research here, which is the World Happiness Report. And I've just looked at the 2021 for this session, and this is a report that ranks countries around the world in terms of happiness. And what I hope stands out is that those Nordic countries are right up there in the top 10. So number 1 at the moment is Finland, number 2 is Iceland, 3 is Denmark, 6 is Sweden, and 8 is Norway. So they change in order sometimes, but those Nordic countries are always in the top 10. And just for reference, US is 14th and UK is 18th at the moment. So clearly it's not just diet. There's other things going on, maybe to do with lifestyle and finances and work and childcare. There's lots of things that go on to affect mood. But one of the key things researchers think is that the diet plays a role in mood. So some benefits of the Nordic diet for mood. And comparing Nordic with Mediterranean, they're very similar in terms of the fish and being low in red meat. They're very similar in terms of the whole grains. There's different types of fruit and vegetable, and I hope you can see that from the 2 triangles there. The left-hand side is the Nordic and the right-hand side is the Mediterranean. So it's different types of fruit and vegetables, but very similar colour range, which means they're going to have very similar polyphenols. It's rapeseed oil in the Nordic diet rather than olive oil, so that's a difference, but very, very similar in nutrients and very, very similar in the health benefits. So as I said, it's up there with the Mediterranean diet as being one that's an ideal diet, really. And the key is that both are very different to a Western diet. Now, that's not a very nice picture of a Western diet there, is it? But I guess what it's trying to show is that fruit and veg and whole grains don't necessarily play a big role in the Western diet. And I'm not suggesting that would be your diet by any means, but a typical Western diet is much lower in those good foods that I've been mentioning as we go along. So that's key, I think, is that Nordic and Mediterranean are very different from a Western style diet. Hear lots of negative nutrition messages, don't we? I don't know if you've ever been to see a dietitian and have heard negative nutrition messages, but I like this cartoon here. The best thing you can do to stay healthy is give up all the food you enjoy. And the poor lady's saying, oh gosh, well, what's the second best? And I quite like that, because none of us want to give up all the foods that we enjoy, do we? We want to, we want to include those. So I'm really concentrating here on, can we change the emphasis in what we're thinking about here? So I've tried to make it much more 5 positive Scandinavian superfood messages. So things that we could eat more of rather than things that we could eat less of. So I've got 5 of them, and I'm sure that you can guess pretty much what they're going to be. But let's go through each one quite quickly. The number 1 is about including oily fish. So these are some of my pictures that I've taken when I've come off a port from the ships. This is Bergen Fish Market in Norway and Copenhagen Fish Market. And you can see that there's a huge range of different oily fish in the Nordic style diet. This is Stavanger in Norway, and I don't know if any of you have been there already, and if you have, whether you went to the fascinating sardine canning museum, which is very near to where the ships were. And it's a fascinating museum about the history of sardines in Stavanger, how they were so important in the economy. And I came away from that inspired to eat even more sardines. And this was just a picture of my snack I had in the market in Copenhagen. So it's whitebait, which is an oily fish. And rather than having a bag of crisps or a bar of chocolate, a lot of the workers in Copenhagen market stop and they have a sack of whitebait for their mid-morning snack. So fish intakes in Norway are high. It's about 2 to 3 fish meals per week is the average. Whereas in the UK and the USA, we're less than once a week that we eat oily fish. And that's reflected in that graph there. You can see this is kilograms of oily fish eaten per week. So UK, very low, 1 kilogram per year. of oily fish eaten. Nordic countries, on average, 8 kilograms a year of oily fish eaten. So it's a huge difference between the two types of diet. And fish is great because it's got a wide range of vitamins and minerals, and it's got a particularly beneficial fat, which is the omega-3 fats, which I know you will have come across. And oily fish, there's a lot of different types, so hopefully there's one or two there that you do like. So the main ones, things like mackerel, kippers, pilchards, trout, salmon, herring, swordfish, whitebait that I showed you from the market, or sardines, as I showed you from the museum. The great news is that these can be fresh if you like it, or frozen, or canned, or smoked. They all contain those great nutrients that fish is well known for. So however you like it, it's fine. The reason, as I mentioned, that fish is so good is partly the omega-3 fats, and we know that they play a really major role in heart health. So having a couple of portions of fish a week is really important in terms of heart disease. Fascinatingly to me, it's also important in brain health. So you remember that saying that fish is brain food? My grandmother always used to say that to me. The brain is actually high in omega-3 fats, especially around this front area of the brain, the frontal cortex, which is involved in things like memory and learning and our mental agility, really. And I've just taken there one picture out of a research paper, which, do you remember I was saying that laboratory studies looking at cells in test tubes can give us information? Well, this is brain cells making connections with omega-3 on the right, without omega-3 on the left. I hope your screen's facing around the same way as mine. So what you can see is that omega-3 is really important in terms of making new connections in the brain. So that was fascinating research that was done showing that we need that in our diet to make those connections, especially as we get older. And backing that up is a population study. Do you remember I said you put those pieces of the puzzle together? Is a population study on fish eating and dementia. And clearly it showed that eating fish was associated in the population with slower rates of cognitive decline, lower risk of dementia. And the graph below there, just from one of the studies, shows you servings of fish a week along the bottom and dementia risk. And you can see that having more than one serving of fish per week more than halves the risk of dementia in that population. So I thought that was really interesting research. So the current recommendations are to eat 2 portions of fish per week, at least one of which would be oily. Doesn't matter if they're both oily, but at least one of them should be oily. But there's a little twist to that message, which is that we shouldn't go above 4. In adults past childbearing age, we shouldn't go above 4 per week. Now that's a slightly confusing message, but it's just because some of the fish, especially the long-lived fish, accumulate some of the heavy metals and pollutants that are in the ocean. So there is a theoretical risk of having too much of those if you ate too much oily fish. But up to 4 is a very safe level, and the benefit that you get from that far outweighs any risks. Things like shark, swordfish and marlin, because they live a long time, they have slightly more of the heavy metals, so that we're recommended with that no more than once a week. And then if sustainability is important to you, then you can look for the kite marks that show that highlight it. And a lot of the oily fish are very, very sustainable. So it's quite an easy thing to put into your diet even if you're worried about fish stocks. There are other forms of omega-3, like fish oil supplements or plant forms, but they're not as effective in terms that all the studies, the population studies, the intervention studies show that they aren't as effective. So the plant forms are things like soya, flaxseed, rapeseed, walnuts, pumpkin seeds. They will give you some omega-3, but they're not as effective, and nor as well are fish oil supplements. It seems to be some benefit from eating the whole fish that is particularly useful. And if this is of interest to you in particular, I will link you to a food fact sheet at the end that specifically covers that area. I do get asked a lot about that when I'm on the ships. So that was fish. There was so much to say about fish, wasn't there? The second tip, remember I've got 5. The second tip is about choosing more whole grains. And I'm guessing you'll recognise a lot of the whole grains there in those photos. A whole grain is really a seed of a plant that contains all the areas. So not just the bran, the outer coating, it contains the starchy bit, the endosperm, and key is it contains the germ. That is the part of the grain that has all the vitamins, minerals and polyphenols, and that's the bit that we lose often when we have very refined grains. So that's why whole grains are so important. It's that germ as well as the bran. And whole grains, as I said earlier, major in the diet. Rye is Finland's national food, but oats and barley are feature as well everywhere you go. But interestingly, whole grain wheat's very similar. So if you don't particularly like barley or rye, then whole grain wheat will do the job just as well. And it's vitamins, minerals, fibre and polyphenols, all the things that I keep mentioning. But there's an added benefit of whole grains is that they're a low glycemic index, which means they supply a slow, steady supply of blood sugar to your muscles and your brain. So these are really useful if you need to concentrate, if you are feeling tired. It will give you a slow, steady release of carbohydrate and keeps brain in good health as well, because the brain uses a huge amount of carbohydrate for fuel. So whole grains are really useful from that point of view. The Nordic diet, as I said, is 25%, and we're recommended to have about 2 to 3 servings a day. So it might be worth just thinking, how many servings of whole grain do you have in a day? The average in the UK or the USA is only 2 to 3 servings per week. So are you above average? Are you below average? Only 1 in 5 people eat enough and 1 in 3 have none at all. So we're not good. It's a bit like the fish story, isn't it? We're not good in a lot of countries at eating enough whole grains. And the benefits from those studies, those papers I showed you, heart disease, bowel health, really importantly, the whole grains have got something called prebiotics in there, which feed the good gut bacteria. And that diagram on the right there shows you something called the gut-brain axis, which is the links, the nerve hormone signals between our gut and our brain. And researchers now think that the health of our gut is really important in terms of the health of our brain. So whole grains will feed those good bacteria for that really important gut-brain communication. And my picture, my diagram that I put together here of a sort of summary of whole grains. If you start down right at the bottom, you'll see bran. That's a 0 whole grain because it's only just the bran, the outer shell. Anything above popcorn in my book is as good as a whole grain. So popcorn's a great one if you like eating it. Then there's all sorts of things like wholemeal breads, pastas, rice, tortilla, oat cakes are brilliant. And then all the breakfast cereals, they're again whole grains. And things like rye crisp breads, wholemeal tortilla. It doesn't have to be just the ones that are eaten in the Nordic countries. It's that principle of having a whole grain food which mimics the Nordic diet, which is so important. So again, there's a food fact sheet that will go through that in a lot more detail if you want to look at increasing your whole grains. Number 3 is eat plenty of fruit and vegetables. Remember I said they have at least 5 a day in Nordic countries, and there's some of the examples there. These are 2 photos that I took. That's Bergen strawberry market in the summer. Just goes on for miles, the different fruit and vegetables that they have on sale there. And then the one on the other side is just a tiny supermarket that I went into, but I was struck by the fact that even though it was quite a small supermarket, it had a vast array of fruit and vegetables. So this was like one of the corner shops, but it still stocked a huge range of different coloured fruit and vegetables, which just gave me an indication of how important they are in the diet of Scandinavian countries. The sorts of fruit and veg that are eaten a lot, they won't surprise you: cabbage, carrots, apples, pears, other root vegetables, and berries. Berries feature in a big way. And interestingly, in many of those population studies that I was talking about earlier, it's these everyday types that are most effective. It doesn't have to be fancy tropical fruits or obscure types of berries. It's these everyday foods that are most important in terms of health. And I've just got a quick cartoon here. I just like this picture of the carrot. I've been on the Nordic diet for a month now. Is this normal? And certainly carrots play a big part in the diet. So the message is at least 5 different fruit and veg a day, and it's really important that they're different because we need to get a range of different polyphenols. And that rainbow picture in the middle there just reminds me to say that having a variety of different colours, that's why it's 5 different. Again, they can be fresh, they can be frozen, they can be canned, they can be dried. All of those will count towards the 5 a day. So my question to you is, did you get your 5 a day yesterday? Sometimes it can be quite useful to just sit back and think, did I get that 5 a day? Because it's a traditional part of the Nordic diet that people do get their 5 a day. And the picture there of the apple just reminds me to say that a portion is roughly what fits in the palm of your hand. So we don't need to be too prescriptive about measuring those out, but it's roughly what fits in the palm of your hand is what would make a portion. And I've got a couple of special mentions here from the Nordic diet. Berries, because they feature in about 1 to 2 daily servings in the Nordic diet. Now that's almost quite surprising, isn't it? Is that berries are so much eaten, and the particular polyphenols that they have are called flavonoids. And there's been a lot of recent studies on that. Even just looking over the weekend, the reports in the newspaper were mentioning again flavonoids. So around 15 berries daily has been shown to improve heart health, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, insulin resistance, inflammation, all those things I was talking about on the physical health side. So it's not a huge number we need, but we do need to eat them regularly. Also a role in protection of the brain nerves and benefits for cognitive decline and for mood. Berries have almost got a superfood status, but they don't have to be expensive berries. Your everyday common or garden, frozen berries, whatever will do the trick. They've all got those polyphenols in them. So I really like those studies. They've really inspired me. The other special mention is fermented vegetables, because wherever you go in Norway, whenever you go into a restaurant, you get served fermented vegetables, often as a garnish, but sometimes as a separate dish alongside. And these are particularly good in terms of gut health, because they've got the prebiotics to feed the good gut bacteria, and often because they're fermented, they've got the good gut bacteria in there as well. So if you like any of the sorts of fermented vegetables that you can buy, then those are great for gut health, and we know gut health is really important for mental health. So we're working through the tips. Got to tip number 4. I've called this one Go Nuts, and that's just to remind me that we're not very good in UK, USA and a lot of other countries at eating nuts, but they're brilliant at doing it in Scandinavia. All sorts of nuts, and actually it doesn't really matter what type of nut you have. They're very similar in terms of nutrition, but the key is that we don't eat many of them. And they're nutritional powerhouses. They've got healthy fat, so sometimes people worry about the fat in nuts, but it's actually all the good kind, the unsaturated fat. It's got fibre, nuts are full of that. vitamins and minerals, and then a huge source of polyphenols. So it's not just fruit and vegetables. Nuts are really rich in polyphenols, and in fact they probably are one of the most concentrated sources that are available in the diet. And having a small handful a few times per week can be a really enjoyable and manageable way to do that. Maybe it's an alternative to crisps or a chocolate bar. Just having some nuts in the diet. And then the health benefits now are just so many. And there's a food fact sheet just on nuts if you want to learn more about those. But I think they're a really underrepresented food in the UK diet and the US. But less than 10% of people actually eat nuts. People often say to me, what about the calories? Well, first of all, it's good fat, so we're not too worried about that. But really interesting studies have shown that they're not linked to weight gain. So the benefits from eating nuts aren't outweighed by gaining weight. And part of that is that the energy, the calories in nuts are not fully absorbed. And if you look at the picture of the plant cell, that yellow in there is the fat inside. And because the plant cell walls on nuts are so hard and so thick, we don't necessarily absorb all that fat. So the calories that you see on the label of your packet of nuts, about 25% less for something like whole almonds, and about 20% less for whole roasted almonds. It's around 20 to 25% less, depending on what type of nut and how it's prepared. So that's quite a good news, isn't it? Is that then we don't absorb all the calories from nuts, but we do get a lot of the other nutrients. Number 5, this is my final tip, is to think about the type of oil. Now, you remember I said that the diets varied. So the Mediterranean diet predominantly is olive oil, but they do use quite a lot of rapeseed oil as well in the Mediterranean. And the main oil in the Nordic diet is actually rapeseed. And the thing about those two oils is they're very, very similar in nutrition. They're both monounsaturated fats, and they both have a lot of polyphenols, which is the colour in the oil, in fact. So I would say either of those are really good. The thing about rapeseed oil is it's much more affordable, and some people don't like the taste of olive oil. And rapeseed oil tastes much milder. A lot of really top chefs now use rapeseed oil in their cooking because it really lets the flavour of the food come through rather than being a little bit overpowering, like sometimes people find with olive oil. So my question to you is, does anybody use rapeseed at home? It's becoming more and more popular in lots of other countries. And I've started using it a lot, and I really like the flavour of that. So that was my 5th tip, was about type of oil. Take home message, which I hope has maybe inspired you in some of those things. The Nordic diet has 5 real key superfoods. So more fish, and a corollary to that might be less meat. Daily whole grains, which we're not doing at the moment, which we know the Nordic diet has. The 5 a day fruit and veg, the more nuts, and then the rapeseed oil. And my question to you really, are there parts or a part, even if it's just one part, that you could actually adopt wherever you live? I say you don't have to be living in Scandinavian countries to appreciate the Scandinavian superfoods. So I'll leave that just as a summary. And then the resources that I mentioned, this is a link to, it's a British organisation, it's the British Dietetic Association, which is my professional association. But I use these fact sheets a lot when I'm speaking on ships because they're based on evidence, they're written for the public, they're free to download, they're updated, and they're really based on good science. So there's one on plant omega-3s, there's one on fish, there's one on whole grains, there's one on almost anything you could think about, the fruit and vegetables, the polyphenols. So if you want to know a little bit more detail, because obviously I was doing a sort of top line view here of these, then please do feel free to have a look and a browse around that website. And a lot of the information is applicable no matter what country you live in. So I'm going to say thank you for listening, but I am going to take questions, so I'm not going just yet. And also I'd like to say as well that I really hope to see you on a Viking ship to Scandinavia, where we could actually sample some of those superfoods ourselves. So thank you again, and I'm really hoping that you might have some questions for me. So I will stop sharing my slides now. And I'll hand over to Heather to ask her if she's got any questions for me.
Thank you, Sue. We do indeed have lots of questions coming in.
Oh, good.
So our first one that I'll go to, this comes from Joyce in Denver, and she says, could you give us some examples of a fermented vegetable?
Oh, okay. The one that I've been eating a lot recently, it's not a Scandinavian superfood, but it's a fermented vegetable, is kimchi, and that's a Korean fermented cabbage. And that one is one where there's been a lot of research done looking at the probiotics and the prebiotics in that one. But the principles will apply to a lot of other fermented vegetables. Sauerkraut is another one. And if you go into the vegetable aisle of a large supermarket now, you'll often see fermented vegetables of all different types. And if you've got a specialist Scandinavian or even Polish food shop near you, you'll find a delicious range. So they can be any type of vegetable, but the fermentation is to preserve them. And that's where you start getting the probiotics and the prebiotics.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sue. Our next question comes from David in Orlando, and he says, is farm-raised oily fish healthier to eat than wild-caught oily fish, or vice versa?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Fresh wild-caught is sometimes slightly higher in omega-3, but to be honest, it doesn't make much difference in practice. It's not a significantly high difference. And I would say, if you're buying a very expensive wild-caught fish, you might eat it less often or less of it. So that outweighs the benefits of having the slightly lower amount in the cheaper fish. So I would say don't be too worried about that. As long as you're following that principle of a couple of portions of fish a week, at least one of which is oily, you will be getting a good omega-3 no matter where it's farmed. But in terms of sustainability and fish welfare, there are other issues that you might want to look into there. But nutritionally, very, very similar.
Thank you. Verity in Salt Lake City says, are omega-3 tablets as effective as eating real fresh fish?
Okay, so that links back to the slide. Another really good question. They've been brilliant questions so far. The omega-3 capsules are really the fish oil capsules. Now, initially, certainly when I trained as a dietitian, we thought that they were as effective for heart disease, for all sorts of other things, as eating fish itself. They do contain the omega-3, but they don't contain all the other nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that are in fish. So they're just the fat. So what the studies are showing really now is that you're actually better off eating the fish, because you get that range of nutrients, those vitamins, minerals, protein, all the other things alongside the omega-3. And it doesn't work out necessarily more expensive to eat fish rather than take the fish oil capsules. So if you like eating fish, that's your best way. If you really hate it, then the fish oil capsules will give you some, but it's not the optimal. It's not what they do in the Nordic diet, for example, and the Mediterranean diet. I hope that answers that.
Wonderful, thank you. Slightly similar question from Gwen in Malibu. So she says, thank you for this really interesting lecture. I'm picking up lots of things to think about. She says, I understand the benefits of oily fish, but I'm a vegetarian. Do you have any tips for plant-based alternatives that can offer a similar nutritional value?
Yeah. Again, unfortunately, the plant omega-3 tends to be the short chain omega-3, which is called alpha linolenic acid, whereas the one that's most beneficial are the long chain omega-3, which is EPA and DHA. Sorry to throw out loads of initials. And we know that it's the long chain ones that actually have the most benefit in the body. But if you're vegetarian or vegan, then obviously those aren't suitable. So having the plant sources, which is soya, linseed, flaxseed, rapeseed, pumpkin seed, the ones I listed on the slide, they will give you some, but you need to be very regular about having those. And that link I gave you to the BDA food fact sheets, I know that's a British one, but it will, the recommendations will apply as well, you know, in terms of amount and sources of food. That lists all of those, but you'd need to be a bit organised about making sure you had some of those regularly.
Thank you, Sue. A couple of questions have come in about types of oil. So Karen and Judy, both in the United States, they're asking if rapeseed oil is similar to grapeseed oil.
No, it's not. It's a very similar name, isn't it? But quite different nutritionally. Grapeseed is predominantly a polyunsaturated fat, so it's like sunflower or corn oil, whereas rapeseed is very much like olive oil. It's predominantly a monounsaturated fat. So nothing wrong with grapeseed oil. It's pretty expensive and it's not that easy to cook with. But the one that's much more versatile, much more similar to olive oil, is the rapeseed oil. And that's the one that's used very, very widely in Scandinavia and in the Mediterranean. So there is a difference, yeah.
Thank you. Question from Patsy here in Redmond in the United States. So she says, I've read that in Scandinavia, a lot of people eat seasonally and forage for their food. Do you think eating this way has an impact on maintaining a healthy diet?
Oh, what an interesting idea. I think it puts us more in touch with our food, doesn't it? If we're actually having to go out and forage for it and we're thinking about how it changes with the seasons. And there's not so much research from the Nordic diet, but there is from lots of Far Eastern countries showing that the more in touch we are with where our food comes from, the more likely we are to put those positive foods in. So yes, I think it's highly likely that seasonality, that foraging, all plays a role in people really valuing those great foods. And, you know, maybe it is something that we could mimic a bit wherever we live.
Absolutely, thank you. A question from Jerry in the United States. So he says, could you just remind us what the value of the polyphenols are and which foods have them?
Oh, okay, yes. So the polyphenols, they're not a vitamin and they're not a mineral, but they are a nutrient which plays a role in the body. So they often act as antioxidants or anti-inflammatories. And they're very often the colours in the fruit and vegetables. So, for example, orange or red. So red berries have got anthocyanins in, which is a type of polyphenol. So they're different types in different colours of fruit and vegetables, and all of them play a big role in heart health, cancer reduction, brain health, immunity, interestingly, which has become a hot topic for us all to look at, and inflammation, which we know is linked to aging. So that's polyphenols in a nutshell. Is there anything else to say about them? No, we don't eat enough, generally speaking. So having 5 a day fruit and veg is a really good way of getting enough. There was a fascinating study that was only published a few months ago. I'm just trying to remember. That was at Harvard University, and they looked at around 20,000 different people over 20 years. And what they found was that the people that had a high intake of polyphenols over that 20 years had much lower rates of heart disease, cancer, dementia, all of those things I've just mentioned. And it was really, in a lot of ways, the fruit and veg that made a difference. What they also showed from that study was it didn't matter what age you were when you started eating them. So the earlier, the better. But even if you started eating them later life, you put more in, you still got the benefit. It was never too late to do that. So that's polyphenols in a nutshell, so to speak.
Thank you. That's interesting. And that links to a question that's come from Marlene in Florida. And she says, how quickly can one see the benefits of making a change to your diet?
Oh, well, you don't see some of the things like your cholesterol and your blood pressure unless you get them measured. But it's going to be several weeks to a few months to start getting noticeable changes in biochemistry in the body. But having said that, one of the studies that was done on it was on berries and mood, interestingly, and I didn't put it into this talk just because it was just a bit too one slide too many, was looking at actually giving, it was one of those intervention studies that I've been talking about, and it was looking at giving people a berry drink or a dyed drink that was the same but just didn't have any of the polyphenols in it. And what they found was that the active polyphenol group got benefits in terms of mood and positive thinking an hour after they've had it. So that's one of those quick things where possibly polyphenols can start to have an impact quite quickly on how we feel. Now that's quite new research. It's a little bit standalone at the moment. There's not a lot of other things backing it up, but I thought it was a really interesting study in that it does show that some of the benefits, especially around the brain, can be felt very quickly. But some of the other things like the heart disease and the cancer risk or other lung changes, they're going to take a bit longer. I hope that explains or just answers that a little bit.
That's wonderful, thank you. Talking of berries, Llewellyn in San Luis says, one food I always associate with Norway is cloudberries. Do these berries have any particular nutritional benefits?
Yes, they do. They're wonderful. They've got the anthocyanins in them, the red coloured polyphenol. And yes, they would be just as good as any other berries. And they are one of the ones that the people eat. As I said, it's 1 to 2 portions of berries a day. And some people, that's cloudberries. But I don't know about where you live, but where I live, they're really hard to get a hold of. So having a berry that you can have, like, that you can access, you can have in the fridge or have in, easily pick up in the supermarket. Don't be worried about those. Often it's the everyday common or garden ones. As long as they're coloured, they've got that polyphenol in them.
Thank you, Sue. A couple of questions also coming in about canola oil. So Christian and also David in the United States says, is canola oil the same as rapeseed oil?
Yeah, it's just the difference. I'm sorry, I should have probably put that on the slide. I should have called it canola as well. But yeah, it's exactly the same.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question comes from, who have we got here? So Carola and Bill in the United States. So they say, it's my understanding that grains are a bit like eating sugar and that actually bread and cereal groups are one of the problems with the US diet. Lectins and the glutens are another problem. Can you advise what breads you should eat or that people do eat in Scandinavia, which are more healthy?
Yeah, I must admit, I don't subscribe to that theory, because I do think, if you look at a lot of healthy diets around the world, whole grains do play quite an important role in that. If you're not keen on eating rye or barley, then something like oats is a really good alternative, because that's still a whole grain and they're very easy to digest. They would count as one of your whole grains. So I'm quite a fan of having whole grains in the diet. Obviously, if you've got particular gut issues, celiac with gluten intolerance or something like that, that's a slightly whole different ball game. But for people that have got a healthy digestion, I think it's quite easy to find a whole grain that you like, that doesn't cause you any problems. So I must admit, I'm quite a big fan of the whole grains, and most of the dietary guidelines around the world do still suggest that that's one of the areas that we're not eating enough of. But it's a tricky area, I do agree.
Wonderful, thank you. Kirsten in St. Louis says, I've read that you should eat your protein and iron along with a food containing vitamin C, as this can help with the absorption of iron to the body. Is there anything that you would recommend eating with your oily fish to get the maximum benefits?
No, I mean, it's very true. Yes, iron, plant iron. So not animal iron, that's easily absorbed, but plant iron. So the stuff that's in cereals or pulses and beans. Yes, we will absorb that much more easily if we have vitamin C with it. Protein doesn't make much difference. What we eat with it, we'll absorb it. And the fish, no, we'll absorb everything that's in that fish. We'll absorb the iron without vitamin C. I think in terms of practicalities, if we want to make sure we get a good range of nutrients in our diet, then serving your fish with vegetables and maybe with some sort of whole grain like rye bread, like they do a lot in Scandinavian countries, or potatoes, or another grain like quinoa, or even coating it in oats. You know, that's a really good way to serve fish. That mix of food groups on your plate is a good rule of thumb, because you'll then get the nutrients you need. But no, you can digest the fish without any specific other nutrient. These are such good questions. It's really making me think. I thought this would be the case. Really making me delve deep into my brain for these answers.
Brilliant, thank you, Sue. Just a few more. So Charlotte in the United States says, how much non-oily fish like cod or tuna would you recommend?
No limits. The guidance is 2 portions a week of fish because of the range of nutrients that's in both. The white fish doesn't have the omega-3. If you think about things like cod liver oil or halibut liver oil, all the fat is actually in the liver rather than in the flesh of the fish. So it won't provide you with the omega-3. That's why the guidance says 2 portions a week, at least one of which should be oily. But yeah, no limit to your white fish.
Lovely, thank you. And Tony in Springfield in the United States says, can you comment on the role dairy products play in a Nordic diet?
Oh, yes. Okay. I didn't mention that very much at all, did I? They tend to be the lower fat versions. So some of the cheeses are lower fat than things like Stilton or cheddar. So things like goat cheese and a feta type cheese. So they tend to be lower fat, but they're really useful because they provide protein. Do you remember I was saying not only half the amount of red meat is eaten? So they're really useful as an alternative source of protein. And then, of course, they're really important as a source of calcium, which we need for healthy bones, especially as we get older. So they are in that. If you remember that pyramid I showed you, they are in there. I guess I just didn't take them out as being a particular superfood of Scandinavia, but they are in there as a fundamental part of the diet, and they provide really important nutrients. So yes, thank you for prompting me on that.
Wonderful, thank you. Cecilia in Grover Beach in the United States, she says, please could you give some more examples of oily fish compared to non-oily fish? Thank you.
Okay, I think the slide I showed pretty much covered them. I'm trying to think if there was any that weren't on there. Maybe something like red snapper or anchovies I didn't have on that slide, just because they tend to be a bit more esoteric, don't they? They're not such common ones. But you can tell an oily fish often by the texture of the flesh of the fish, and sometimes by the colour. So the white, they're called white fish, the ones that don't have the oil in them, and most of the other coloured fish, like you think about the dark colour of mackerel or the pink colour of salmon, you can mostly tell an oily fish if the flesh, it tastes oily and it's coloured and strongly flavoured. But the ones I listed on there are by far the most generous in terms of providing you with omega-3. If the lady wants to ask me about a specific fish, please feel free to write that in the guidance. There is, on the food fact sheets that I mentioned, there's one purely on fish, and that will list every single fish that is an oily fish. Again, I'm ever so sorry, it's slightly more British orientated, but the species will be the same.
Perfect, thank you so much. A nice comment here from Noelle in the United States. She says, this is so informative, I'm going to have to watch it again. But she also asked, what is your personal favourite food, and is there a cookbook you could suggest?
Oh, well, I'm a huge fan of fish. I'll eat any type of fish, so I'll plump for fish, and I'll probably go for smoked mackerel if I had to narrow it down. Now, cookbook. If you look on the internet for a bookshop and you type in Norwegian recipes or Scandinavian recipes, you'll come up with quite a few. I personally don't know which is the best, but they'll let you browse through there often and have a little look and maybe look up 1 or 2 recipes and see how they're presented. There are several, but I haven't got one specific that I would go to, I'm afraid, that I can recommend for you. But there are several Scandinavian themed recipe books. But even if you just looked at a fish recipe book, and there are so many of those really good ones, that would inspire you. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same food they eat in Scandinavia. It can be one that you can get more locally and that you can buy and cook quite easily, as long as it meets the same category, such as oily fish or whole grain or fruit and vegetable or nuts. I think that's the beauty of it, is that these dietary principles are able to be translated to wherever we live.
Wonderful, thank you. A couple of questions about sweet things. So Chase in the United States says, how do sweet pastries, cakes and other less healthy foods fit into the Nordic diet? What would you recommend in terms of treats per week? And then also Laura in the United States says, how do you feel about sweeteners like Truvia?
Okay. So yeah, if you go, do you remember that example I gave you of the white bait in the market in Copenhagen? It's quite interesting is that a lot of the snacks in Scandinavian countries are not the sort of pastries, biscuits, confectionery that we might very easily reach for. They do tend to use other foods, and nuts would come into that category. They do tend to use other fruit and vegetables, nuts, even fish and whole grains as snacks. So I would say we don't have to cut out all those sweet foods that we like, but maybe having a few of our snacks as a Scandinavian superfood instead would be a really good starting point, because nobody wants to cut out all those foods that we enjoy, but using the inspiration of Scandinavia to improve the quality of some of our snacks. And what was the second part of that? Was it about Truvia?
Yes. How do you feel about sweeteners like Truvia?
Yeah, I use Truvia. I like it. It's no, he's really digging deep into me going out of the idea of Scandinavian superfoods. It's made from a plant. It's extracted from a plant, and it has quite a nice taste. And it's very, very sweet. So you only need a small amount of it. So in terms of calories and in terms of dental decay, it's a really useful alternative to sugar. And as I say, I find it quite a palatable one. And it's marketed under various different names, but Truvia is probably the most commonly one. And I think it's a very useful adjunct. It's also available in drinks, so sweet drinks, if you want to not have the calories from that. And it's available as a tabletop sweetener that you can add into tea and coffee as well. So yeah, it's a great alternative sweetener.
Perfect, thank you, Sue. Interesting question again from Noelle in the United States. So she says, should our food be organic?
Okay, now this is a very complicated question and a really good one. The organic idea encompasses more than just nutrition. So the organic idea is looking at sustainability and animal welfare and soil and pollution as well. So it's a wide picture. So you can argue that in lots of ways, organic food might be better for the environment, might be better for animal welfare. When it comes down to nutrition, there are actually surprisingly small differences between organic and non-organic. Sometimes organic fish or an organic meat will be slightly higher in omega-3. Sometimes organic fruit and vegetables will be slightly higher in terms of polyphenols or fruit and veg. But it depends very much on what type of fruit and veg or what type of animal and where and how the organic things were used, the organic standards. So in a practical sense, if you're looking just at nutrition, it doesn't make a huge difference, really. And if you're buying only organic fruit and vegetables, but you're buying fewer of them because they're more expensive, then that outweighs the benefit anyway. So I think it's very much a personal choice. I don't think there is a should or a must be if you're looking at nutrition. If you're looking at the wider environment, then you can make different arguments around that. And that's an incredibly sort of narrow answer to a really wide question. So I hope that does offer some information. And I'd love to hear what you think as well. But if we were on a ship, we could sit and have a drink and debate that afterwards, but maybe not possible here. But hopefully I'll meet you on the ship one day, some of you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sue. I think we've probably just got time for one more question. So I'll finish with this one from Sasha in Elliott City. And she says, what would you say would be the perfect breakfast in a bowl to set you up for the day?
Oh, I love these questions about what's your favourite and what. I would pick porridge there. I think porridge with berries on it. That's two of the superfoods in one bowl there, isn't it? Or you could have some rye bread with kippa. So you've got two different superfoods there. Yeah. I would go for either of those. But I think the important thing is we mustn't forget that we've got to enjoy our food and having a bit of variety. So I wouldn't necessarily want porridge with berries every day. I might vary it. But that would be my two breakfasts of choice. I'd love to hear yours as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sue.
Oh, you're welcome.